Hey, I want to welcome you to our Preach with You Summer Edition. We're talking about treasuring God. Here's the booklet if you're using it. If you're not, that's okay. These sermons are awesome on their own, but there is a place to take notes in the booklet. This sermon is about treasuring the church, and there's a spot for notes here. It's the second sermon if you're doing them in order, but if you're not doing them in order, it's whenever you want it to be. But we've got a new format for this, where there's not going to be a Tuesday webinar. You can watch this video anytime. If you're watching it, that's in fact what you're doing. And we're going to do a Friday Power Hour. It's going to be at 11 a.m. Eastern time. There'll be a Zoom. It's for, you should by Friday have a pretty fully formed sermon, but you need like a little help with how to organize it or to have an awesome introduction, or you're missing one illustration, you want to hop on. It could be about this sermon. It could be about any of the sermons we've done or series we've done with Preach With You, because a lot of people are just kind of doing it on their own with their own schedule. And so I think it's gonna be really cool. We get to get together and kind of workshop sermons together on Fridays. You go into the weekend with your sermon tied up real nice, ready to rock on Sunday morning. It's gonna be so encouraging. So that's what's happening. We've got today with us, we've got Devin Cook from the Racine, Wisconsin church. Devin is an awesome man of God. He's part of our Midwest Small Church Leaders group. And he actually ran a draft for the group. And we have 12 Midwest Small Church Leaders, and we broke up into discipling groups, and it was the most amazing thing. He had a PowerPoint, gave people nicknames, just dissing on people in the most loving way. It was awesome.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm part of the Indiana Stamp Lickers. That's the team he made up for me. Devin, what's your group called?
The Quad City Squatters.
The Quad City Squatters. And so we need to have like a championship, a discipling championship. I don't know how we could do that, but
yeah.
Yeah. So, hey, are you a Celtics fan or a Warriors fan, or you hate them both?
I'm definitely going for the Warriors.
Yeah.
Because the Celtics beat the Bucks. I ain't vibing with that.
Okay, so it's based on bitterness. So
yeah, a little bit.
Got you. I'm a Draymond Green fan because I went to Michigan State, but he's a little hard to root for at times. But Spartans, we got to stick together. So
yeah, man, represent.
Absolutely. All right. So, hey, Devin is going to take us through this sermon, treasuring the church. And the goal for each of these sermons is to look at Jesus in the Gospels, and then also to look at the Psalms. And so we'll get into that. I think that combination of Gospel and Psalm, even though this is a fun summer sermon series, really adds a lot of depth to it. We're helping people see that the Bible works together, and that God's big plan has been rolling all the way through Scripture up until now and beyond. So, Devin, if you could talk to us a little bit about just your process, your overall goal. I love at the beginning you've got your key in the notes so that we can understand your notes. That's so helpful. Thank you. Yeah, take us through big picture of this sermon.
So, big picture of this sermon, I was really excited to grab this one because the church is one of the pieces in God's kingdom. Like all of what God has revealed to me through time, the church has been like one of the most mind-changing and important things for me. Because I didn't grow up in the church or anything like that. So I don't have a very healthy background with the idea of church, or at least coming in. Like I would go around, people would ask me about church, and this would literally be my quote for years. Like, I believe in God, but the church house, because the worst kind of people are found in those churches. So that was my mindset coming into studying the Bible.
Hey, Devin, can
But
you repeat real quick? I think the video cut right when you said your quote. What's your quote that you would say?
yeah, so it would be I believe in God, but the church is the devil's house
Okay.
because the worst kind of people were found in those churches in my experience. So then, I study the Bible. I come to church for the first time, which is church, and it was totally different, like from the first day. And then people never switched up. Um, the guy that was studying the Bible with me, Dwayne Marks, you might know Dwayne,
Yeah.
but he was studying the Bible with me, and he never switched up. And that's what I would always see with people in churches. So long story short, it helped me realize that the things I had experienced weren't actually churches.
Mm.
They were just groups of people in a building with a cross on it. But from there, I like dived head on into learning and experiencing the fellowship as a whole. And I spent some time over by you in Lansing, spent some time in Milwaukee and in Columbia, Missouri, things like that. And the church, God's true church, it never switches up. There's flaws, we got flawed people, but I really do treasure the church. And if people treasure God's community of people, then I believe it's for us.
You froze on me, Devin.
Helps us get closer to Him. So I really want the church here and everywhere else to understand that. So
Yeah. I think that's such a great testimony, that you could go from like hating the church to treasuring the church. And so I'm so glad that you jumped on this message for it. And I treasure the time that you were in Lansing. It was it was awesome.
it was
It's
fun.
probably where you learn like, okay, the church isn't perfect, but we're gonna stick with it. We're gonna stick with
Yeah.
it. So I love it. All right, so hey, take us through your introduction here. How are we starting this? How are we hooking people, letting people know what's going on?
Yeah. Yeah. So the introductions for me are, I kind of try to structure them the same way overall. And the biggest thing that I want to do is help the church hear how important the given topic is to God. And I think I have in here that the most important, I think, and I believe it was Steve saying that I had learned this from, but the job of the preacher is to reveal the heart of God, is to help people connect with the heart of God. So that is what I'm trying to do. So in this introduction portion, what I'm trying to do the most is help people understand that God deeply desires for us to treasure the church. That it's a key component in our relationship with Him. And oftentimes, if it works really well, then what I'll do in the introduction is I'll make a reference to Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3, because generally, I mean, probably all the time, but I'm not confident enough to say all the time just yet. But a lot of times there's references right back to the beginning, because God never changes, right? He never switches up. So He's trying to get us back to this original existence, the way things used to be, Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. He wants us to be in that relationship again. That's why it's called restoration. So if He's restoring what used to be, then that means the elements that are the best, that are good, are from old. They're not new things. They're ancient things. So I'll tie in something like that, but sometimes that works better in in the main part, but here it definitely, I believe it works really well right in the beginning. So I'll introduce how important it is to God and how it has been important to God from the beginning, these relationships.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. I can definitely hear Steve Sandin in that, who I just cherish, and just gospel, to teach gospel that, you know, the world was created perfectly. We've fallen. Each of us has sinned, but God had a redemption plan through the cross and through the resurrection. But we're still living in a fallen world, and so we're waiting for restoration. And so the church is full of people who are redeemed but not fully restored.
Yeah.
And so I think so good to tie this message and the church into God's big picture right from the beginning. And then where do you go from there? How do you get into the body of the sermon?
So what I'll transition from talking about the word treasure and how there's a difference between the action of treasure and the verb and the noun form. So now the noun form is a treasure, like, you know, whatever, some riches or something like that. But to treasure, you can hold on to something. You can treasure a thing. So in Matthew 6, it talks about, right, do not store up treasures in heaven, or do not store up treasures on earth, but store up treasures in heaven. For where your treasure is, there your heart will follow. It's interesting because that the Greek word for store up or lay up is another form of the word that is used for treasure in that same sentence. So it literally, quite literally, could be translated, do not treasure treasures on earth, but treasure treasures in. And then I'll talk about the fact that God's church is a treasure in heaven, right? That it has to be, because you think about the folks that are in the church, where do they end up when they die? In heaven, right? And where will you end up prayerfully when you die? Where are you trying to get to? Heaven. So if that same group of people is found in heaven, it is a heavenly eternal treasure. Yeah. Right. And how we should only treasure the things that are eternal. And the things that are earthly, they're the temporary type of thing. So after explaining all that, and then kind of right before, I probably won't even mention the church part. I'll just mention a ton about treasures in heaven versus treasures on earth. And then right at the end of the introduction is when I'll nail in, like, and one of those treasures is the church, and we need to treasure the church, right? And then I'll transition right into the main topic. So then once the main topic comes around, what I hope is done by that point is that the church is kind of either like in their heart, sitting on the edge of their seat, like, oh, wow, this is really important to God. And this is a really big thing. So now they're kind of tuned in as to, well, why is the church so important, or why is treasuring the church so important, but also questioning, like, am I treasuring the church, and how can I treasure the church? So hopefully they're there right now. Yeah. Is all this is coming together?
Yeah, man. Even as I'm listening, I'm thinking about like things that I treasure, like tacos and trail running, which those things don't go together. They work against each other, but I still treasure them both. And I'm like, but seriously, I'm like, man, how much do I treasure the church? And sometimes how much do I feel like, to be straight up, church can be a burden. It can be tough. It can, there's a lot there. And so decide, am I really treasuring it as a treasure? So yeah, man, I think it's great. Let's get into the body here.
Yeah. So then, and I like doing this, kind of rhetorically asking, what? So, why am I talking about this? Like, okay, Devin, all that sounds good, but why do I even care? Why should I care about it? And I'll ask questions like that just for transition or whatever. But then I'll jump into Psalm 42 and read some of Psalm 42. And right in the beginning, it's clear that the writer of this psalm is struggling. He thirsts for God. His soul is downcast. He's feeling assaulted, right? And his faith is being attacked by not only himself, like his soul inside of him, but also people around him. People are saying, well, where's your God? Like, what's going on? You got all this faith, but where's your God now? And I'll stop there for a moment, because church members, and us included, have felt some of this before, right? Like, just soul is downcast, you're going through tough times, yada yada yada. So I asked the question, like, have you ever felt like this? Have you ever questioned your faith, or has your faith ever been questioned by others or by the world around you? And then, just shining a light on the fact that this guy was in a difficult spot, that his soul was being tormented. And in that passage, what is it? Oh, starting in verse 4,
yeah.
It winds up getting into this talk about the church, right? Or about the community.
Yeah.
So in the midst of all this struggle and turmoil, one of the things that helps him get out of that turmoil is indeed this time with the fellowship, this time at God's house, and with God's people, singing praises to God. So why is it important? It's because this is one of God's tools, and one of God's tools to keep us faithful. The church is here to keep us faithful.
Yep.
So and it's not a bunch of time probably, but that's the setup to why it's important. And then I'll go into some practicals about how to treasure.
Yeah. I love that. I love this. I love Psalm 42 because, I like being out in the woods, and it sounds like, it starts off as a psalm that sounds like, I just need to be alone. My soul thirsts for God, as a deer pants for flowing streams. So pants my soul for you. And it sounds like, man, I just need to get away and be by myself, and then I can be restored. But that's not actually what the psalm's about. He's like, he's longing to be with the fellowship, to be in the house of God, to be with the church of his time, of their time, I should say. It's the sons of Korah that wrote this. They're all feeling some things,
Gotcha.
and so it's the answer isn't always getting away, but it's treasuring the church, even in the Old Testament, in this beautiful psalm. That's what it was about. So that's awesome. Do you want to take us through some of those practicals?
Yeah. And I'll just say quickly here, like, I like what you said about the fact that the answer it's typically not, sometimes it is, but it's typically not to get away.
Yeah.
And especially getting away in the wrong kind of way. Because many times when people say, I just need to get away, it's to isolate, not to run to the Father.
Yeah.
And if, if that's the action that we take, then we find ourselves digging a deeper hole. That makes it difficult to even come back to the fellowship.
Right.
It's always really hard to come back to the fellowship, something that we desperately need, when we've been isolated, when we isolate ourselves for so long. It's a super dangerous thing, actually.
Yeah. That the longing that's expressed here to get back with God's people, that's something that we should really work on in our hearts, to have that instead of sometimes we long to be away and be alone. Very different than I think what a lot of Christians think.
Yeah. So just going into these practicals, one thing, sometimes I don't even put in practicals, and I'll spend like the whole sermon attempting, to reveal the heart of God and why this thing is so important to God, because sometimes that should be enough. Well, it should be enough to motivate us to find the practicals for our lives. What practice will work for us? Okay, if this is that important to God, then I need to make it happen for me. And when I feel like sometimes when you give specific, go do this, it works really well for one person, but it doesn't work well for another. So you could give the command or whatever, go read your Bible every day. But there are people, and I found this out the hard way, in leadership here in Racine. Like the things that I like to do and the things that I was taught to do as a young disciple are really difficult for other people. And I just thought for a long time, oh, they're bad Christians. You know what I mean? Like you just, why can't you do these things?
Right.
But if you struggled all your life with reading, the last thing you want to do is go read a book. You know what I mean? Now, that doesn't mean avoid reading the book.
Right.
But you can implement those scriptures in different ways. But the goal is to feed yourself with the word of God. So sometimes I stray away from direct practicals, but more so, here's what God desires, and here's why it's important to him. Let that motivate you. Or if I give practicals, then it's more broad with a lot of different angles to accomplish that specific heart goal.
Yeah.
So in this case, I think what even though that's what I said, this could be more specific than even I usually get, or try to get. But with these practicals, I asked the question, I'll transition like, okay, so this is important, we know. So how do we do it? How do we treasure the church? And I find it super cool in verse 4. He says, these things I remember as I pour out my soul, how I used to go to the house of God under the protection of the Mighty One. And the thing that I draw out of that is, one way to treasure the church is to treasure memories.
It's great. Yeah.
These things I remember. And there's been times where I don't know if you've been here, I know many people have, where I've questioned, man, do I even want to be a part of this church anymore? Do I even want to be a part of God's kingdom? And the thing that keeps me behind the line every single time is the memories that I have inside God's kingdom. This is the best life I've ever had. You know what I mean? I remember my life beforehand and it was terrible. I hated it. And I remember my life in God's kingdom and days seem dark right now, but this has been beautiful. You know, I've met amazing people. I've experienced things that I never would have experienced outside of God's kingdom. So that's the push that I'll give to the church is remember these good moments. Remember what has happened inside of God's kingdom.
Yeah.
So that'll be that. But a good chunk of that portion, what I ended up doing a couple weeks ago is I emailed the church and I had a bunch of people send me memories. What is your favorite memory?
That's great.
Of the Racine Church, of being a part of the Racine Church. And then I'll throw those up on some slides or something like that, little snippets, so that people could see what people have experienced and what has kept people motivated to keep their faith in the past. So that's what I'll do in that time.
That's great. I'm adding a comment in the notes here so people can follow that example if they want. That's such a good way to look ahead to this message and make it really special. Devin has done a great job with his notes too. He's got highlights around like kind of like notes for you guys as you preach this in addition to his notes. And so super awesome, bro. Super appreciate it.
Sure.
That'll be beautiful. A beautiful time of sharing. Because, and I think, even I think a lot of our churches have been through hard times as the world has gone through hard times the last couple of years, and we're still in it in some ways, but there's so much good and so much, everybody's got a story of their lives being changed, and it's going to be awesome. So that's great. So then you move from there, and I love this next point, take out the trash.
That's right. That's right.
How are we going to take out the trash, Devin?
Yeah, man. So then we jump from there and go into John 2, and that's the clearing out of the temple. And that's the portion of John chapter 2 that I'm choosing to focus on here.
That's a good transition because you're talking about the sons of Korah are lamenting about wanting to be in the temple. And then we fast forward to the Gospel of John, and here's Jesus and his disciples in the temple.
Oh, wow.
And this is what happens. So,
yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Come on.
So, yeah, man. So Jesus, he walks into the temple and he sees like it being made, like they're making a mockery of God's temple, the place where God is supposed to dwell. They're just doing all types of stuff that clearly indicate a selfish kind of heart. They're exploiting people for their worship, right? You need a sacrifice? Well, come buy your sacrifice from me. You know what I mean? That type of stuff. So I don't know. It's just a messed up situation.
Yeah.
And I got a little note in here, and it says it would be like walking into church and having to rent a pew. You know what I mean? Like you gotta sit down, right? Well, why don't you rent my pew for, I'll just charge you $20 for the worship service. No biggie. You know what I'm saying? Like you would be like, okay, I'm going somewhere else. Like I'm not worshiping here. So there's all these things that are hindering the worship of the people. And there's even, I read this commentary about this moment, and it says that they would set up these tables in the area where the Gentiles would worship. So it was taking up the only space that the Gentiles had to connect with God.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it was literally hindering or removing the ability for people to worship. So Jesus comes in, flips the tables, and is like, get this stuff out of here. You guys are making you're another moment where this is described. He says, like, you're making my father's house. My father's house is supposed to be a house of prayer. You're making it a den of thieves or something like that.
Yeah,
I
and
can't
for all
remember
nations, and that's a house of prayer for all nations, and they're taking up that space. Yeah,
exactly. So it's completely, um, opposite of God's desire. So, and I just talk about how Jesus was consumed with the zeal of the Lord, right? And it moved him to act and clear out and take out the trash. So he was protecting God's household, and he was being protective over the worship of the people and stuff like that. So then, after explaining all that, I'll be posing questions like, are we protective over God's household? And are we seeking to get rid of the things that are hindering our worship together? So all of that to communicate that for us taking out the trash, and for different churches it could be different things depending on like what that church might be struggling with. But if a church has a gossip problem, that you need to take out that trash.
Yep.
It's hindering the worship of people. If the church has a contribution, a giving problem, you need to take out that trash. Become sacrificial, become people who look to serve the kingdom. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Elements in different churches
Yeah.
that are hindering worship that we need to take out.
Yeah. I love it. And I just like the bluntness of, hey, we gotta take out the trash. I think that that's the zeal that's reflected in what Jesus does when he goes to the temple, with that same heart that the sons of Korah had. And so we bought a church building a few years ago, and I'm a little bit convicted because we had pews. We wanted to get rid of them because they were like separating people, these giant pews. It was so weird. And we actually did a chair fundraiser, so people didn't need to get their chairs. It was called "We Wish You a Cherry Christmas," and it was the cheesiest thing ever. It's like, buy a chair for you. You need a place to sit during church, so let's do this.
Oh man,
give it as a gift. The church needs seats. So I'm convicted. Hey, we got the chairs, and I don't think anybody left the church because of the chairs. So
there you go.
And now that they're sitting in them, it's working. But I love that too. Even with the church building, I'm thinking about like our refrigerator at the church. Like, people put stuff in this church refrigerator that they never intend to get out of that church. Like, we have so many different kinds of mustard, little packets, giant, like it's so much mustard right now in this refrigerator. Got to get the trash out. Nobody needs that much mustard. I love it, man. So I love it. I think that it's deep. It's concise. You're making the point. And then you're going to wrap it up. How are you going to conclude this sermon here, Devin?
Yeah. So it's just kind of that idea of, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you. That type of thing. Yeah. So it'll be jumping back to the beginning of, we want to be people that treasure treasures in heaven, the eternal things, the things that matter to God, not the things that are here on earth, right? And the only treasure that will be in his eternal kingdom are the things that are eternal, which, that whole book that you have, the Treasuring God book, it's all things that have eternal value, vulnerability, even like treasuring creation will help you understand the idea of who God is and what he has done. You know what I mean? So all those things are eternal, have eternal value.
Yeah.
And this thing as well. Treasuring the church has eternal value. It's relationships with God's people that will last forever. So we need to start treasuring them now. That type of thing. So, and then I love painting the picture and letting the people know, like, God knows what he's doing. He knows how to operate the world. And this is particularly important for us. Treasuring the church is particularly important for us for the reasons that I've said thus far, which is in times of need, we need one another. When our soul is downcast, we have to be surrounded by faithful people. God knew what he was doing, and he put that in our lives for a reason, right? God said, it is not good for men to be alone. And they weren't alone, they had God. But then he also gives Adam, Eve, a person for relationship as well.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we have one another, because we're going to need each other in times of need. And then explaining those things of how to treasure the good times, treasure the memories that you have. Don't let go of those things, because when it's dark, that memory will carry you through to the next moment where you lean on the church again. And then protect the church, take out the trash and protect the fellowship, which is really big. I'm getting convicted myself thinking about it, because I got to have a big conversation with a guy coming up, and it's either repent or you got to go. And I love you so much, but I got to protect the church. Man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The church is more important than you and your sin. You know what I mean? So even those difficult conversations we need to have is not taking out him as trash, but taking out the sin that is trash.
Yeah.
But either way, so yeah. Lean on each other. Remember the good times. Take out the trash. And kind of wrap it up in that way.
Yeah, I love that. I think those two things, it's so simple. Remembering the good, getting rid of the bad.
Exactly.
And you can keep, your treasure will stay like polished. It'll stay in the right place in your heart. And it makes me think a little bit, there's just recently we had like the crypto Bitcoin NFT crash, like all that. I have known nothing about that. But I know that it has like tanked. And I think sometimes we feel like that with the church, like we're like, oh man, the church, it's like, it's crashing. But that's not the case, as you made the point here. It's eternal. Its stock is always rising. It's are we treasuring it or not? That's what makes the difference. So I love it, brother. It's gonna be powerful. Puts people's hearts in the right place. I think over the summer, this is one of the reasons we did the Treasuring God booklet and the series here, is because it's hard for people to treasure the church while they're treasuring their time away. But if we focus on it, think creatively about how to unite people even while they're dispersed, and God's an expert at uniting people who have been dispersed, then we can do this thing, So this message is gonna be so powerful. Devin's gonna preach it, and then we'll put his YouTube video or Facebook video up on the sermon notes in the folder, so you'll have the link to that as well. You can see what's happening in the Racine Church as Devin preaches powerfully there. So thank you so much, Devin. Super appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, for sure, man. I'm so glad you're doing this.